I have a question about Maya. Did you speak about Maya? I also didn't speak about Maya. A question to you. I have a question about Maya, particularly the term Mahamaya. What does it mean? In the divine play of Holy Mother, she is often referred to as Mahamaya. If Maya is explained in our Friday night class as an illusion, and the Maha means great, how can the Holy Mother be described as great illusion? Yeah, but still it is about Mahamaya, so you can answer this, Maharaj.
The concept of Maya, that means illusion, is like this, that it is a false perception. That means what we are perceiving is not really real perception. It is not the real thing that we are seeing or perceiving. That is the concept of Maya, and it has been termed as illusion. But Chetananji almost in every retreat emphasizes that it is not really unreal thing. Something is there, but we are not perceiving it properly. And something, that thing is only Brahman. We really do not perceive it properly. The reason is this, that means we perceive things because of our projection. Projection comes from our training, our knowledge, or our sanskar. In that way we see things. And I can explain it very clearly, and you will be able to perceive it also very clearly how it happens. You know, one omen is there, and that omen is seen as a mother by his son, by her son, then by husband as wife, by father as daughter, and by friend as a friend. So same woman is there, but they are seen, perceived in different ways. So in that way, actually, the only Brahman is there, but out of our projection and training, we are seeing the Brahman in different ways. And that is actually illusion. That is Maya. That is the simplest way of explaining what is Maya. Do you have anything?
Why Holy Mother is called Mahamaya? That is why.
That, of course, probably because in scriptures it has been said Mahamaya. In that way. That probably you will be able to answer better at this moment.
No, but
I
okay,
can.
I will give since you are saying. The source of this illusion, as Swamiji was pointing out, that there is something that is real, but something that is, we see the superimposition, and therefore we do not get the true picture. Now, this power, because of which this happens, that gets the term Mahamaya, the power, as in this Durga Saptashati or Chandi, this word Mahamaya Prayachati, that it is the primordial power because of which the one appears as many, and the things get seen as they are not. So that is, and Holy Mother represents that power, and therefore she gets called in certain context as Mahamaya. This is Maharaj about Turiyananda. Are there the notes or letters about the influences of Swami Turiyananda on people or on monks, their lives?
Swami Turiyananda's life has influenced many monks, and you will find them written as reminiscences of Swami Turiyananda in different places. I do not say, but definitely many monks who were influenced, they have penned down their reminiscence about him. In that way, it is possible to find. Especially, as I told you, Swami Otulananda is one of them. So he has written. The title may not be exactly reminiscence of Swami Turiyananda, but maybe Shanti Ashram or days in what is called in Varanasi. In that way, there might be mentions. So, about him, many Swamis who came in contact, there are reminiscences. Letters, spiritual letters, they are written to different persons. They have been collected and published in English as well as in other languages. That is, Chetananda has edited or published one book translating from Bengali letters have been translated into English, and original English letters are also there, which Swami Turiyananda wrote to devotees. So these are available. Spiritual letters of Swami. Spiritual treasures of
spiritual treasures. Swami Yatishwaranand was greatly influenced by the letters of Swami Turiyananda. There are many letters in that collection, in Spiritual Treasure, which were written to Swami Yatishwaranand.
Should we try to measure our spiritual growth? How should we handle anxiety? Measure spiritual growth means I do not know how to do it, but definitely if we can keep our mind, or if we can check how much time we are devoting to spiritual thoughts or engaged in spiritual activities or things associated with spirituality, probably if it increases, then it is a sign of spiritual growth, we can say. But I don't aspire as such, except teacher, that means except teacher, it is difficult to figure out how much spiritual growth is there, whether we are in the right direction even. So that is a subject of a spiritual teacher who can really measure it or understand it. And how should we handle anxiety? Anxiety, just not to think of anxiety, that is the way, that is divert the mind, something which is really more wholesome. And that way you can overcome anxiety. I think that is the solution. What else? Taking the name of Lord. Or another way of anxiety will be like this, overcoming anxiety is like this. It is of course true in many circumstances to face it. You know, Swami Vivekananda has a beautiful story. That means it is a life experience of him also. That means once you are as an itinerant monk, when he was in Varanasi, he had faced monkeys, you know. That means he was passing through a narrow passage. One side there is a wall of a temple, another side was the pool, that means a pond. And he was crossing that, and on the opposite side there are monkeys. So in that way he was chased by the monkeys, and he was running away from them. That was a very life-threatening situation. So from a distance one monk saw, another unknown monk said, "There, face the brute." So facing the brute actually worked for him. So when he faced those monkeys actually and showed them that he wants to attack them, then actually they went away. So probably for all hardship and hurdle and all those things, and anxiety is one of them, you need to face it properly, quietly in a sense, that means intelligently, without reacting to that. Point by point, if you just analyze what is anxiety and things what needs to be attended, and in that way, if you just go ahead, then I think anxiety will be overcome. I can give you example. You know, we give talks, you know, giving talks, public talks, especially young days when we started just, it was an anxiety, that means how we shall face and all those problems used to come, worries come. So the point is that if you just attack, in a sense, that means if you just analyze it, what are the reasons why I am having this? And one by one, if you just solve them, probably you will have to find out what you need to talk, in what way you'll talk, and if you just practice all those things, so naturally the worries will be much less. And it is a sort of training also. The same thing can be applied, same principle can be applied to any anxiety. Going to the source, point by point, dividing it, why these things are happening, and what you can attain at this moment, and where you need help, and in that way take help, and in that way anxiety can be overcome. I think that will be the practical solution for anxiety. Swamiji mentions Swadharma as according to one's propensities or liking. I have also heard Swadharma as something that is not necessarily of one's liking, but one that is beneficial and which usually a guru can decide for a disciple. Just as for Arjuna, Sri Krishna showed the path which was not of Arjuna's liking. Could you please clarify on this point? Thank you. Yes, that is true. Swadharma may be influenced by what is called our ignorance also. That means we feel attracted to something, we feel that that is to my liking, but it may not be true. That is why somebody who is conversant with the what is called psychology, or as in case of Arjuna, Krishna was readily available. So he could understand what will be the situation if his student, that means Arjuna, follows, which actually is not his nature. It is not liking, but it will be more appropriate to say it nature. That means his being, psychological being or physical being, training, samskar, all those things clubbed together forms the nature. So it was definitely according to his, against his nature. That is why he gave this advice. Nowadays, it is possible to have professional advice also. That means when you go to school and if you want to select some courses, if you think that is, I would like to go to study this thing, and if you go to an advisor, so that he or she will be able to tell that why it will be possible for you to pursue that course, or why it will not be possible to follow your course by talking to you and by seeing the background and all those things. That is possible nowadays. Because nowadays a lot of openings are there, so it is possible to follow to a path which is according to one's own nature.
If the master does everything, why does he make me doubt him? How do I get rid of the doubt? Means master does everything, so amongst everything he makes me doubt also. So how to get rid of that doubt?
If master does everything, that means you mean God does everything. Why does he make me doubt him? Existence of God, how do I get rid of doubt? Getting rid of doubt, I don't know actually how it is a grace. By grace only doubt can be overcome. That is a possible. Doubt actually in one sense it is positive side. Everything has got positive, negative side. At least you are thinking of God in a negative sense. But if you continue to think and if you go further, probably it will be overcome in course of time. And it has happened in many cases, or at least in case of, say, Swami Vivekananda. He was an agnostic. Agnostic means doubting person. So he always was not sure about the existence of God. So he went here and there. He was in the Brahmo Samaj, and then he went to different persons whom he heard that is a spiritual person, or he is known to have spiritual experience. And in that way he was serious about his doubts, so naturally he made effort to find an answer. So in that way he went to Devendranath Tagore. That is a celebrated story. And ultimately when he came to know about Sri Ramakrishna, so Sri Ramakrishna point blank actually, what is called, told him that yes, God exists and you can see him. So that impressed upon him. Still he had doubt. And ultimately, because of his grace, that means Ramakrishna at one point told him that, are you still doubting that the one which was born as Rama and Krishna in the ancient days, and he is born in this body. So he had, by his grace, this is not actually, you can say that because he had doubted and it went away automatically, but because of his grace actually ultimately he overcome his doubt, and that was great benefit. He got the benefit, great benefit out of it. So that is the way a doubt, there is no, I don't think, if you have doubt, you have to try to get the doubt overcome by making effort. That is the only way that it can be overcome. What do you think?
Yeah, Maharaj told nicely that the doubt can be a good friend, good step for advancement, and that is when we use it in the right way. What is criticized is the nature to keep on doubting rather than resolving the doubt. That is where Bhagavad Gita, it censures this kind of doubting nature as samshaya atma vinashyati, that it is ajnascha. How Lord has, criticized that, you can see. Ajnascha ashraddhadhanascha samshayatma vinashyati. It is that, and there in commentary Shankaracharya shows that ajna means the one who does not know, and ashraddhadhana, the one who doesn't have faith. They can be, gradually transformed, but samshayatma is very difficult thing, because the samshaya atma, the very nature of that person is keep on doubting. No, you do this effort and you will succeed. Again doubt will be there. Should I do or should I? It is basically becoming a Hamlet thing, that there is not much progress possible. That is, and one should be very careful about that. Otherwise, as he said, doubt is very good. Through doubt, we progress because we resolve the doubt. We go forward and make sure what is the reality. But the person who has this doubting nature, everything will be, shrouded with doubt. This is doubtful, but if I go to resolve the doubt, again there will be a doubt. Whether I will go or not, I will again have, whether I will meet success or not. This is that doubting nature which does not lead us to any positive progress in life. So that should be taken care of. How do I maintain faith during adversity?
By prayers, probably that is the shortest answer. Continuation of spiritual practice, even mechanically, that will be the way out. One should have faith God under any circumstances that actually can lessen the what is called adversity or feeling of the adversity. In the lives of great spiritual personalities, we see that there are, when adversity, calamities came, they actually bore the calamity evenly. Sthita prajna, that means that is one of the signs which we aspire to acquire, and in that way it is possible. Spiritual practice actually can get, by having a spiritual foundation and continuation of spiritual practice will definitely can take out one out of adversity. There is no doubt about that. I can give one or two examples. One example is coming to my mind, but it is not that well known. You know, M was there, Mahendranath Gupta, who wrote the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And he was a householder. And uh, he was, he had children naturally, and towards the end of his life, he had small children also. So one of one of those children actually died, and that news came to him. And nobody saw any change of his demeanor or something like that. Such adversity or calamity he could bear because of his association with Sri Ramakrishna, and of course because of his spiritual practices, whatever it may be. So definitely spiritual practices can keep one, what is called, out of any effect of this adversity we see in the lives of great persons.
This is asked about what advice the London Swami gave you. Can you share that advice?
Yes, that is a very good important. That advice is very simple. He said that early morning, if you get up and do all your chores, that means starting from brushing the teeth and taking the shower, and if you are ready for the day, then you don't have to bother about all those things during the daytime. So I do that. That means when I come out of the what is called bathroom and all those things, I am ready for the day. I don't need to go for a shower or anything else during the day. But many people do not do that. That I have seen and observed. That means they do morning chores, but they have to go again for shower before the meal and all those things. They take some time and come back. But that I can obviate by practicing his advice. That means I don't have to worry about those chores that I need to do. Very practical advice.
This is a question about what is special about Gitokta Yogi.
No, special means Bhagavad Gita, you know. Yoga means, as you know, the control of the mind. So all the processes that have been described in the Bhagavad Gita can be summed up as Gitokta Yogi. Other yogis nowadays or later on also, you see, something has been taken out of our scriptures, including Bhagavad Gita. So because our Patanjali Yoga Sutra is later book, so he has taken out the what is called the meditation aspect, physical aspect, if you call it, the control of the mind, and in that way that book has been written. So it has come out as a what is called present practice of yoga. But in Gitokta Yogi, actually a person who is of composed mind, Sitopragna is one of that. It has been described in many places as a yogi or as a gnani or as a bhakta, so that those descriptions are there. All the descriptions actually will fit into the term of Gitokta Yogi. That means Lord Krishna description of a yogi that we find. How to interpret Swami Triyananda's life as a Gita-based yogi. That means he actually cast his life according to Bhagavad Gita. It was so dear to him. As I told you at the beginning, that from the childhood actually he recited Bhagavad Gita. It is a sort of that he, because of his sanskara maybe, I do not know why, he had done that, and the whole life was cast. He kept touch with Bhagavad Gita throughout his life in this way. So naturally we see, and also Swami Sri Ramakrishna said, by seeing him or by talking to him, by knowing him, that he is represent what has been described in the Bhagavad Gita as a yogi. That means Gitok, the description of yogi actually fits into his personality. In that way he has been named like that. It is a Sri Ramakrishna's term, Gitokta Yogi. That means in Bhagavad Gita, if somebody asks that, well, all these yogis has been described, so can you show an example? Probably he will be the fitting example instead of Swami Vivekananda, Brahmananda or Swami Shivananda. They are also yogis, but if we look to the principles that has been described in the Bhagavad Gita and want an example in a person, exemplified in somebody's person, probably he will be the greatest example amongst the devotees or among the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Probably he meant that. Any addition? All right. while cooking, sometimes I need to smell to make sure the ingredient has not gone bad, etc. Then feel bad about smelling. Any solution? You see, I shall tell you one story. You know, for offering things, we should not taste as Swami Turiyananda taught to a disciple in the Shanti Ashram kitchen. It is like this. It can be done in this way. That was a tricks that we can do. That actually advice was given by one Swamiji who used to do worship. His name is Swami Hitananda. He was very well known in our order as a pujari. He was a disciple of Swami Shivananda. So he was a very well-known pujari, and also throughout his life, I think he had done puja. So he was an expert. So naturally, you know, for offering, you have to put a mango is there. So will you offer it, what is called a sour mango to God? So that question came to him. So how do you solve that problem? He said that you do like this: cut a thick portion. That means when you cut the skin, cut a thick portion and throw it on the ground. Take it out and taste it.
A clever way out.
So probably instead of smelling, you can throw a one spoon on the ground and then take it, taste it.
I have a question on that. The testing, we know about the Ramayana story. Somebody
Ah.
tested the berries, and then that half-eaten thing
Right.
they gave to that thing. So that shows that if the devotee is so devoted that she has the courage to test it, that's it is the devotee.
Actually, we have to become shabari like.
Where the difference is.
You can, one can.
Yeah, if one is really like Shabari, a devotee of that standard, then only that works.
I know, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can.
Sure.
And not only that, Mother Sarada, I think someplace I read that if you test it, you want to offer God or Goddess something that is nice, so you don't want to make a pious which is not really sweet, it is apple pious world. So I think she has mentioned that part. Somewhere
It may, yes, I understand your explanation, but it may be otherwise also. If you offer something which is out of a devotion, if you offer something which is not that well cooked, that will be accepted by God because you are of that stature. Your devotion is of that stature.
but I would prefer to make sure that it is.
The reason for Turiyananda. That is the last question.
My question has to do with Swami Turiyananda's abrupt departure after being here only 18 months in California, or in California for 18 months, yes. Did he have a very negative view of America, perhaps because of the lack of spirituality in West, which could have made him profoundly homesick? Actually, it is not. That means he was very appreciative of American culture and life and all those things, and he asked others to learn that also. But I have never come across any remark about negative attitude of spirituality in this country. It is spirituality, you know, in India we say we are very spiritual and all those things, but we are very materialistic also, spiritual. But the point is that spirituality is a culture of India. We may not be spiritual, but culture is spiritually oriented. And in this country, there are spiritual persons, but the culture is materialistic. That is the point. So it shows that materialistic culture. But definitely, spirituality is a sort of gift of God. That means you cannot really impose here or there. So it develops inside everybody. So when time comes, it is what is called, we get it. So in that way, I have never heard or come across any adverse remark about spirituality in this country by Swami Turiyananda. And that was definitely not a reason. He was very eager to meet Swami Vivekananda. That is that is quite evidently shown in the book.
Very good,
Hmm.
So you will add sugar in your own, you will then add sugar. Should you re-offer that?
I don't think so. It is traditionally it will not be done like that.
Or
You prepare another cup and offer. You prepare another cup, well prepared, and then offer. I have no, it is a matter of tradition actually.
happens to me
Hmm.
a few times.
In devotional practice, there is the scriptures mention about two types of devotion. One is the Vaidhi, means you follow the prescribed procedures to cultivate love for God. And another type of devotional practice is when the love has already been cultivated. So, the procedure by which you go in a formal way is to cultivate love. But once it is cultivated, then none of these rules become applicable. It becomes very natural. Then all those restrictions and following exactly the procedure, that becomes meaningless. So at that time, what you do, nobody needs to question about it. But to develop love, yes, because there are so many opposite tendencies in our life, and so we have to put curb on them. It is that formal practices of devotion, they are very important at a stage when we want to develop love, but actually the love is not there. There is the love for all the sense pleasures. We don't want it, but it is there. And we want to love God, which is not there. So now the question is how to cultivate it. So there all these procedures come into picture. That okay, do exactly like this. Don't do anything. I tell many times the story of the gentleman, our devotee who cuts the fruits for the worship in the morning. So I gave him this work because in the kitchen I saw him, he was cutting something, and while cutting he was putting things in the water. Look. Mm. So I told, hey, look, there is a little work for you. You come for the early morning meditation, which is good, is it not? Oh yes, good, Swami. That is really good. I don't come, but maybe I'll try. It is, and then when you come for morning meditation, after that there is worship, and for worship you have to cut the fruits. But one difficulty is, I tell you, you cannot eat anything while you are chopping. It is to be offered to God. Don't touch anything. Just. And he said, okay, I'll do that. Then he said that is really tough. I am trying. It is that's really tough not to eat anything. Sometimes the mind says, there is you alone are there, nobody is observing you. So who is going to see you when if you say put a piece of banana in your mouth? Who is there to observe you? But then I tell myself, no, you yourself are observing, so you are being observed. So it is, and thus I prevent myself from eating it. So that is, it is in all, it gets gradually, it develops then. And then you come, naturally you will not be able to eat. Because of this, the culturally developing like that, I cannot put anything in mouth while cooking. Even though it is not going to be offered to God, somehow or other that is so ingrained that it is, unless we say Brahmarpanam and all that, I cannot eat anything that is being cooked there. So that is how you practice first, and then it becomes your second nature. So it is then those when the love becomes natural, then those rules and all that doesn't matter. It is when you are, in a movie, if somebody is acting as your child, the lady is this acting as mother. Now the director tells, kiss that baby 3 times, do like this 4 times, hold tightly, not too tightly. Not, so the director tells everything to the actor. If for that lady's actual baby, does that need to be told? No, because the love is already actually there. Where there is the show of love to begin with, then all these things come into picture. Okay.
Actually, I got this question when listening to one of the questions. So if we say that everything happens by the will of God, we should accept everything as the wish of God. And then the question says that the doubt is also given by God. So there are certain scenarios in which it is wish of God, and sometimes it may be misleading. Sometimes it is probably a spell of Maya or whatever, our ignorance, by which we are doing certain actions and passing it in the name of God wants me to do this. So how to make that distinction, and when to say that it is by the will of God, and when to say that it is my ignorance which is proceeding.
Whose wishes we are not able to decide. Whose wishes to answer this question?
Hmm? Difficult to answer this question. That means what is will of God and what is not will of God. In one sense, that means everything that we do is will of God, we can say. But definitely, scriptures are there. That means what is good for us, scriptures always say. If it does not follow, if something which we are doing is not according to scripture, we can say that is not the will of God. In that way, you have to apply our discrimination. Scripture is meant for that, actually, that when we are in doubt what is good and what is bad, the scripture will say this is good, because people, by following this discipline or this path, as successful, or they realized God, if you call it. But this is the way actually negative things have happened. So in that way, you can figure out what is good and what is bad. So following scriptures, we can really get rid of that type situation. That is. Everything is given by God, definitely. Doubt is given by God. You cannot create. Doubt is definitely given by God, but is a beginning of the something that you want, or that it may lead to something which you want, actually. In that way, doubt comes.
So this was this experiment in Shanti Ashrama.
Hmm.
Swamiji wanted this as a, in India, for example, this is common, right? People leaving the society, going out in the caves and the mountains to practice spirituality. Why was this experiment wasn't successful in the United States? Why Tribhunath Nandaji didn't want to pursue it with him?
Huh.
Even though you say it's a very spiritually elevated place,
Hmm.
just go there once and
Yes, because of practical reasons. That means it is not that he gave up the pursuit of spirituality, but he thought that Swami Tribhunathityananda actually started one ashram in San Francisco and used to have monks and nuns also. That he trained them, or used to train them. In that way, he took that job, took that mission there also. But there was no other place available to start this experiment at the time of Swami Vivekananda. That was the only available source. So he actually wanted to try because of the situation and circumstances. For Swami Turananda, the scenario was a little different. That means he found that it is not becoming practicable to have that experiment done there. So he did practice, or what is called, he tried in San Francisco. And ultimately we see that it was successful in San Francisco. After him, Prakashananda was there, other Swamis came. So that tradition has been maintained, and in that way, that is going on. Practical difficulties is the only circumstances which is that is why it has been abandoned there. That is the thing, practical difficulties. What? Oh yes, there are many other organizations. That means Christian organizations are there, even New Age organizations are there. They have tried, or they are still trying. That means it is a sort of what is called inspiration comes to somebody, and he or she actually leads people who want to follow, and in that way, there are many organizations or individuals who are trying this, trying this, and probably will be trying that also continuously. Hippie movement, hippie movement. That is a concept, but people are ready to practice there. Some people are there to practice that also. So in that way, definitely all thoughts, it is a place where you can try anything in this country. So it is always going on, and it will be going on forever.
There are the transcendentalists in US here who did like that, like Thoreau and Alcott. Uh, so they started some such colonies. Robin, where is that your place there? Yeah, Harvard. So there is that colony, is it not? Fruitlands. Yeah, Fruitlands. So there, what was his name? Alcott. Yeah. Yeah. So they started a colony like that to practice this living spiritually without any external things. But the focus was not exactly on spiritual development, but living without any amenities. So that doesn't mean that you automatically grow spiritually by living in surroundings without the other amenities. That is, the two things are very different. And if the focus is just on living without electricity, without these other conveniences of civilized life, you will gradually learn to live like that. But that is no guarantee of spiritual progress. It is not that you will think of God everywhere or your heart will become purified. You will develop relationships with the things around. It is, those things will be, you will get attached to those things. One will get closely, you say, connected and attached to those things, not to God necessarily. So, while living in such surroundings may be helpful to get rid of our dependence on various amenities, uh, it is not that just depriving oneself of those amenities will automatically make us spiritual. There should be the spiritual urge to get united with God, and therefore shunning or non-dependence on these so-called comfortable things in life. So that should be there. Otherwise you will see in many places in the world where people live without any of these amenities anyway. It is what is there. One of our teachers used to tell that just by fasting things do not become, spiritual automatically for you. So many people in the that famine related places, they die of starvation. Does it mean that they realize God? That is not the case. There is for a lot of areas in the world there is no electricity or running water or whatever. What was described is that Shanti Ashrama thing, full of snakes. All those things are there. What happens? They become expert snake catchers. They become all those things. It is. They live like the people who used to live 5,000 years ago in forests and caves. To become spiritual is a different thing altogether. One can develop spiritually even by living, as our Adishwaranandji had that fond distinct, that living right in the Times Square also, that one can develop spiritually. Or one can go to the remotest corner, will not be able to meditate. One can meditate in the Times Square, one may not be able to meditate even on the top of Himalayas. So it is not automatic guarantee. I mean, it could be used as a help. So living in those conditions, like in the Shanti Ashrama, it is, it could be testing to those certainly who are too much attached to the modern comforts, which anyway now we think like that. During when Turiyananji started that, there were very few places anyway where there was electric connections, not much, hardly any really. So didn't most of America still used horseback as the most convenient, the vehicle. So it was different at that time. So it didn't have water. Many places there it was common to get water from a long distance. So it was difficult, but not that that alone can make somebody spiritual. It is, there has to be that spiritual urge inside. And for that you perform austerities, that is very good. If not, well, your life will be like somebody who doesn't have the amenities and is trying to make best of it. If you see people living in those slums in Mumbai, uh, conditions are not good, but does it mean that they become spiritual? That doesn't make anybody really spiritual as such. It is deprivation is one thing, and spiritual evolution is another thing. So we finished, I think, a little early. So, uh, okay.
Uh, it seems that when an avatar is born in one place, at the same time, there are highly spiritual persons born about the same time in another place. Like in India, when Sri Ramakrishna was born, on the eastern side, on the western side there was Shirdi Sai Baba, on the northern side there was someone in the Punjab, and in the Baha'i leader, I think, was also born about the same time. In Bulgaria, Master Bansa Bruno was born about the same time. So, would it be
All right. The question is that, avatarhood as such is very difficult for us to figure out. It is a matter of time. Who is an avatar, who is not an avatar. Rama, Krishna, they are time-tested avatars, so it will take time. We call Sri Ramakrishna avatar because according to scriptures, all the signs are there in that way you call. But time will be the test whether they are sustained as avatar. That is the point.
But could it be possible that an avatar, instead of coming suddenly, there is a burst of avatar?
Actually, it is not like that. That means avatar brings, if somebody is an avatar, he will bring his what is called company with him. That means they will be with him in the same place, or they will propagate the same ideas. In that way it will continue. And it will continue for about, as Swami Vivekananda said, about 1,000 years or something like that. That is the taste of avatarhood from our point of view. But those who have insight, that Swami Vivekananda, they have insight, they have told that Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna is an avatar, his influence will remain for 1,000 years. We believe that. It is a matter of belief.